So, for my Module 1 journal entry, I wanted to take a different approach and dive deeper into a recent interest of mine. I have always loved spoken word and the realm of poetry, as I'm someone who is a fine artist, but I've never really tried poetry myself. So, I decided instead of writing my journal entry, I wanted to kind of write my feelings these past few days of what I've been learning and put it all together with other areas of Indigenous art that I'm familiar with and like to study and kind of all combine it together to really shape and show just sort of the passion that this newfound knowledge with my existing knowledge has really sparked. And yeah, so I hope you enjoy this alternative journal entry method.
Growing up in school, I was told stories about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, but these stories were brief, shallow, and left me completely unaware. It wasn't until my undergraduate years that I was able to choose my studies and give my brain some air. I decided to dive deeper into the stories of those who came before me, conquered for me, and yet still encounter racism, appropriation, and underappreciation. I cannot stress it enough how wrong it is to label anyone for any reason, but to call Indigenous people names like savages or dirty sheds a lot of light on the posture of your heart and your unwillingness to change.
It is clear that using the knowledge inventory test, I have made some progress. However, I was still unaware of the facts like less than 10 of the first languages in Canada are commonly spoken, and yet the federal government still thinks that money is the ultimate token. Or why wasn't I taught that June 21st is National Aboriginal Peoples Day? But, nevertheless, we throw a bigger party every week for Friday. The reality is that the population of Indigenous people living in Canada is increasing, and the majority of Indigenous people are my age of 25 or younger. I live an hour away from one of the top 5 cities with the largest Indigenous populations, but heaven forbid we recognize them as anything but our nation's foundation. So, what is the Indian Act, you ask? It is active legislation used since 1876, where forcing the assimilation of Aboriginal people into mainstream society is the ultimate task. The knowledge inventory was a reality check, and it is clear that claiming I'm well versed on Canadian history is a train wreck. I did not pass this test, but that doesn't mean I wallow in my disappointment and do nothing like house arrest. Instead, I'm becoming educated and becoming a better ally for the very people that are oppressed. Answering the 10 statements in the colonization activity was an easier experience for me, and that is because there's a difference between understanding and comprehending, you see. I can attempt to comprehend the atrocities that Indigenous people endured, but for a white female raised in mainstream Canadian society to say I comprehend means that I understand from my experience, and that is just obscure. The Indigenous worldview is one that sees life as unified, where spirituality is the ultimate guide. And the thought that land isn't sacred, well, that's just the biggest lie. Prioritizing relations with people is key, and understanding that truth stems from experience, you see. Teaching Indigenous studies will come with its challenges, but by doing so will help eliminate that Teaching Indigenous studies will come with its challenges, but by doing so, it will help eliminate Indigenous people being called savages. I strive to be a teacher that sparks change, so celebration, acceptance, and support are no longer just a foreign exchange. I stand for unity, power, and love, so I urge you to begin to dissect what your blind spots are made of.
You see, as Rebecca Tavendung said, you cannot sugarcoat the struggle, and hard work is hard work. But the concept and importance of Indigenous voices having merit to speak should be looked upon as nothing but essential framework. By silencing these voices, we run the risk of the nation recolonizing in attempts for reconciliation. But it goes beyond that to focusing on the importance of decentralizing white stories, because without it, all it causes is a more segregated nation. Why are these superheroes neglected human status and treatment? Why was their land taken just because of an abusive treatment? Why does the nation act like we can sweep these injustices under the rug when all that does is feed into this capitalist drug? I may be a small voice, but the Indigenous New Medium Symposium has encouraged me that if I have something to say, I ought to step out and say it. What these superhero stories need is more. More presence, more power, more merit, more airtime, because as we stand right now, we are still intruders on their traditional land full time. As Chase Iron Eyes stated, the pivotal point comes in deconstructing this patriarchy and this state of imbalance that we exist within. By entertaining and continually flirting with Western media, the actual needed stories are looked upon as valuable as Wikipedia, and that needs to stop. Captain America said it doesn't matter what the press says. It doesn't matter what the politicians or the mob say. It doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else: the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. And please don't misinterpret my superhero metaphor. The Indigenous people are not to be fantasized or forgotten like they were after the war. They are without a shadow of a doubt our nation's core. And as a future educator, it is my duty to educate the future generation more. By listening to podcasts and films such as these, attending webinars and field trips should come with ease, because students today need to realize that all stories, all people, all cultures are free. And that freedom comes when we immerse ourselves in literature like April Raintree. Through this media, I take the importance of stories, but who tells those stories deepens the knowledge inventory. Build relationships with community elders and friendship centers so that these stories can be told by actual members. Community circles, talking sticks, and land acknowledgements I'm familiar with, but how about approaching social justice through the lens of creative process? The creator of Snowguard, the Inuit teen Marvel superhero Jim Zub, allowed for his creativity to be the one to speak up. So after studying and analyzing the power of Indigenous culture, why can't students help conquer? Allow them to create more Indigenous superheroes or write letters or poetry to government expressing their thoughts, because I strive for my students' passion to act like a societal blood clot, changing the perspective of education and what is taught. Because if I have learned anything from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, it is that despite the trauma, they continue to lead with resilience and resurgence. And that is why my classroom will be a place that fosters reemergence.